And we are recording.
Good morning, colleagues. My name is Dr. Donna Souter-Hodge. I'm the Vice President for Operations and Advancement at CSU Pueblo. We are delighted to welcome you to the Spring 2022 Convocation opening session. We have a guest speaker today that our president will introduce to us a little bit later. We are going to start the morning with just some quick reminders about our webinar format and what that looks like and what it'll mean to you to be able to interact. You'll notice that at the bottom of your screen, you have a chat option. Please feel free to use that for general welcomes, introductions, any kind of just generic conversation you might like to start. But we'll utilize the Q&A today for any questions you may have. We'll also be responding to those Q&As with links and others during our session today. So we'll be tracking there. So any questions that you have for President Mottet or for our guest speaker, you'll put in that Q&A. This is an interactive session, so at the end of President Mottet's welcome and his State of the University address, we'll have some other exciting news to share and then some time for conversation between our guest speaker today, our keynote, Brandon Boustede, and President Mottet, and then leave plenty of time for questions from our audience. So welcome to Spring 2022, and President Mottet, the floor is yours.
Very good, thank you, Dr. Souter-Hodge, and good morning. And welcome to the Spring 2022 semester and to Convocation Week. I hope you and your family members, first and foremost, are healthy. I also hope you've had some time to take care of yourself. Today, I'm going to talk about the health of our university. But before I do that, I wanted to acknowledge the reality of our health. I think there are many of us who are not feeling well. We're feeling tired. We're feeling frustrated, just for starters. This is our 5th semester of the pandemic, and we just want it to be over. I share these feelings with you. What has made me feel better and more hopeful is my making the personal decision to let go of that which I cannot control. And today I ask you to consider doing the same. We cannot control the course of the pandemic. We cannot depoliticize the pandemic. We cannot control what people believe about the status of the country's public health or the efficacy of vaccinations, masking, or other interventions. We cannot control the high levels of disagreement among our city, county, school boards, or public health officials. What we can control, however, is how we protect ourselves and the campus community from the pandemic. We can control how we treat others and how we react to others' behaviors. We can control, to a degree, our work schedules through the alternative work arrangement policy. And we can control how we contribute to a positive workplace culture by engaging and being involved. And finally, we can control how we serve our students, which ultimately impacts student retention and persistence. When I let go of that which I cannot control and focus on what I can, I feel more empowered and energized, which is how I'm feeling this morning. Today, I'd like to discuss the state of our university. I have been your president for almost 5 years. Today, I want you to understand better the health of CSU Pueblo. And I'd like to discuss our health around 5 themes: financial, enrollment, academic, student success, and culture. In each of these themes, I'm going to address the progress we've made throughout the past 5 years and where we have more work, which will be the focus of the next 5 years. So I'd like to start by talking about our financial health, and this is the largest part of my message today. Before the pandemic, we identified that we needed an additional 10 million in revenues in order to have a financially sustainable university. For the past 5 years, we've ended each year in the black, but we lack the funds needed to reinvest in new programming, to address compensation concerns, and to address deferred maintenance projects. Vision 2028, as you know, is designed to yield 10 million more in additional revenues by the year 2028. And we are doing this in 2 ways. Number 1, we are rebuilding our enrollment, and we're doing this in probably the most challenging higher education enrollment context. And number 2, we are diversifying our sources of revenue so that we are less dependent on student tuition. The question that we're asking ourselves is, how can we make our campus work for us? How can we better utilize our resources and our assets so that they generate revenues? There are a number of leaders who are working in an innovative manner to find ways to generate additional revenues. So the question is, what are the indicators of financial health? They include our reserves, our audit outcomes, our accreditation, and who is investing in CSU Pueblo. I'd like to talk about each of these rather briefly. First, I'd like to talk about our reserves. These are the rainy day funds that are designed to be used for such events as a pandemic. Our reserves as of December in the last year, we ended the year with reserve balances. Our operating reserves were $6.6 million. That means we've got 6.6 million in the bank. And it's in an account called our operating reserves. We also have a set of reserves called the extended studies reserves. And we have a total of 7.7 million in the bank in the area of extended studies. Now, to put this in context, in 2015, our E&G reserve balance was at a $2 million deficit. Through a more disciplined set of business practices, we've grown our reserve balance from a negative 2 million to an almost 7 million. Our extended studies reserve balance was setting at 1 million in 2015, and today it's almost at 8 million. Again, this was made possible through a team of innovative employees who develop and use strategy, understand the importance of customer service, and adhere to a disciplined approach to running an educational organization. Another indicator of our financial health is the outcome of our audits. We are audited often, and we are audited annually. And as you know, we've had a history of audits that have been challenging for us. The results of our last 2 audits for fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20 came in with unqualified opinions, meaning that there were no recommendations and findings, meaning that we had clean audits. Our auditor is Clifton Larson Allen. They audited the financial records and internal controls to ensure that records are in accordance with general accepted accounting principles. What I want you to know today is that we are all responsible for these positive audit outcomes, and I thank you. And I have a lot of gratitude for how we're conducting our business today. Our accrediting body, called the Higher Learning Commission, or we refer to them as the HLC, they carefully review every aspect of our operations to ensure that we're meeting the highest academic quality standards, and we have a disciplined business model in place so that we're financially sustainable. In 2020, we had a mid-review cycle from the Higher Learning Commission. Their visit examined our business model, our fiscal sustainability, in addition to our teaching and learning effectiveness. Their visit in November of 2020 resulted in a team report that confirmed that CSU Pueblo met 100% of the HLC accreditation criteria, and that the institution had made significant progress since their previous visit in 2016. Yet another important indicator of a university's financial health is in the number of people and organizations who are investing and supporting our university. Thanks to the help of many in marketing and communication, university advancement, and our foundation, others are taking an interest in our work and our new vision to be the People's University. We have expanded our appeal, which is one of our 3 wildly important goals. We've recently been featured in published or forthcoming issues of prestigious national media outlets, including Forbes, Al Día, Latin American Times, International Business Times, and Hispanic Outlook. Our overall brand awareness between 2018 and 2020 increased over 16% in Southern Colorado and 6% with the general public. More work is needed, but these are some significant improvements. Within the past 5 years, here is a partial list of our investors. As you know, the Board of Governors has pledged to invest $34 million in our university between now and the year 2028. The state of Colorado also is investing in our university. They invested $17 million so that we could renovate the old psychology building, and today we have the Center for Integrated Health and Human Inquiry. And they're investing $17 million in the renovation of our technology building. Also, the CSU Pueblo Foundation is investing in the university and conducting a comprehensive campaign called The Drive. And our trustees and the community and the foundation will be raising $50 million between now and 2028. One of our other investors is Capital Dynamics and Johnson Controls. They have invested in us for the next couple of decades by installing a solar farm on our property, allowing us to cap the increase of our energy costs to no more than 3% annually for the next 2 decades, when costs have been escalating at about an average of 8% over the past few years. We also remain grateful to a number of our employees who've applied for external funding. In the past few years, we've been awarded funding totaling over $26 million. In 2021, we received more than $14 million in new grant funding. For a university of our size and with our infrastructure, that is amazing. Funding came from a variety of sources, including the Department of Education, the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the William T. Grant Foundation, to name just a few. Some are asking, what is the impact of this external funding? This type of funding supports faculty scholarship and creates research experiences and experiential learning opportunities for our students. It provides opportunities for growth for all employees and crucial financial resources for summer funding for faculty, funds for professional development for faculty and staff, the revamping of classrooms and laboratories, implementing curricular innovations, and supporting equity and student success. I share all of these financial indicators and professional opinions with you today to demonstrate that the financial health of our university is improving. It is improving because we provide an educational experience that students desire, and we have recommitted ourselves to a set of policies and, again, disciplined business practices that has enhanced our long-term financial sustainability. Now I'd like to discuss briefly the impact of the pandemic on our financial health, and we've taken a hit. I'm very proud of how we've managed the pandemic. It has not been perfect, but without a playbook, we put together a smart plan that was recognized as a best practice by the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. We did our best to protect our students and employees, and we will continue to do so. In terms of our operating budget, the pandemic impacted our bottom line. We have a budget deficit currently of 3.8 million that was the result of reduced revenues due to the loss of student enrollment being down almost 6.2% over the current pandemic timeframe, but still less than the 10% that we anticipated at the beginning of the pandemic. And we've increased costs and expenses that are related to not laying off any of our employees or students, and costs associated with serving students during a pandemic, including testing costs and increases in technological expenses. The budget gap is currently being filled with government monies, and these monies will go away in fiscal year 23. For those who attended our budget meetings in December, I laid out a plan for how we're going to address the budget deficit. The Board of Governors has agreed to our plan to address our deficit over a 3-year period. We will be depending on our reserves, which is our rainy day fund, as well as some reserves from the system to help us balance our budget for the next 3 years. I will provide more detail at the budget meetings this week. That is the section related to the financial health of our university. Next, I'd like to talk about our enrollment health, and these are tightly coupled. We continue to work and live in what is probably the toughest enrollment climate in higher education. Why is that? First, we are living and working through a pandemic. We have a very strong job market. Many of our students, many of our upper division students this fall made the decision not to return to the university, and we believe, based on the data that we have, is the result of a strong job market. Public perceptions of higher education continue to lag, despite empirical data that shows the value of a 4-year degree, and that's frustrating. Demographics are changing due to reduced birth rates. The state of Colorado, like many of the other 49 states, has defunded higher education, putting more of the financial burden on students, families, and institutions. The Colorado Community College enrollment this fall is down 16%, or over 11,000 students, and that is problematic. As you know, Colorado is a saturated higher education marketplace, and you've got to differentiate yourself in the marketplace, and we're working hard to do that. We continue to help our city shift an unfair stigma of our city that continues to be problematic for us. And also, we are working with the city of Pueblo and the county to help transition Pueblo from old to new economies. Our community continues to lack a larger economic development plan that complements the current manufacturing base. Our graduates still do not have a professional or technical community to join once they graduate, forcing many of them to leave the region. Throughout the past 5 years, our enrollment has declined by 11%, or 446 students. The most precipitous drop was in 2020. During the pandemic, when our enrollment was down 3.3%, or 129 students. This year, we saw for the second time, and this is important, this year we saw for the second time in 5 years, a rebuilding of new undergraduate students to the university, despite all of the above challenges. And we must recognize this incremental growth of 47 new students to CSU Pueblo, despite the enrollment context we are currently living and working in. 47 students is 11% toward the rebuilding of the 446 that we are down. With that said, we did not reach our enrollment goals this fall. We were up in new students. However, we had a larger than usual and expected returning students who made the decision not to come back to the university to complete their degree at this time anyway. We know that many of these students who decided not to return did so because of either impacts of the pandemic or, as I mentioned earlier, the current job market that allows them to better contribute to the stability of their families at this particular time. To put our fall 2021 year-over-year enrollment in context, we were off enrollment by 85 students, or down 2.3%. This is our year-over-year, and we're looking only at headcount, with the exception of Fort Lewis, whose enrollment was up 3%. The percentage down ranged in our state from our negative 2.3 to both the University of Northern Colorado and Pueblo Community College being down 10%. Metro was off 7.6%, and the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs was off 3.1%. The bulk of our enrollment will always be our first-time full-time students. However, we are working to diversify our enrollment strategies to include new student populations, including adult and online learners, as well as growing our graduate student populations. Again, it's important to keep in mind that the demographics are shifting in the United States and that we have fewer high school seniors going on to college simply as a result of reduced birth rates. We are expanding the number of track centers in our area high schools. That is ongoing. We continue to add academic programming that maps to the economic development as well as student interest. And since 2018, we have worked to right-size our marketing budget, providing additional funds that allows us to increase our brand awareness and reach in the marketplace, both directly tied to enrollment strategies. I am excited, and we are excited about the strategies we have in place for the fall 2022 semester. We've launched the following innovative enrollment strategies, optimizing our existing assets and resources to increase our enrollment. First, we've launched Colorado Promise, which provides free tuition to qualifying students whose family incomes are $50,000 or less. We are investing almost $1 million to strategically increase enrollment in specific academic programs through targeted marketing and through the scholarshiping of students in those particular programs. We are scholarshiping 150 residential hall beds to grow enrollments from strategic locations, and a joint task force, including employees from extended studies and admissions, are implementing a set of recommendations that will increase enrollment decisions to less than 24 hours. And what I should also mention is for fiscal year 23, there will be no tuition increases for undergraduate or graduate students as a way to keep higher ed accessible and affordable for our students. We have struggled with our enrollment throughout the past 5 years, and more work is ahead. But I remain grateful to all of our team members who have minimized enrollment declines and have allowed us to have some incremental growth of new students in the fall of 2021, which is again during one of the most challenging times for college enrollments. The third theme around health of the university is our academic health. Since implementing Vision 2028, we are working and thinking differently. I want to thank our department chairs and program directors and their respective faculty for driving this level of innovation. Their work reflects the values of our new vision, specifically to interdisciplinary learning and entrepreneurship that elevates our people and our community, creates educational opportunities, fosters unique collaborations, and supports inclusion, access, and affordability as a gateway to the world. This particular statement was pulled from our visioning documents and in many ways reflects the theme of this semester's week of Convocation around partnerships and collaboration and the future of higher education. At our last board meeting, the board approved our moving forward with the following programs and credentials. And as Dr. Abdul-Rahman was listing these programs, and after receiving the board's approval, I was a very proud president because these are innovative programs that again map to our students' interest and map to what I believe is the driving economic development for our region. They include the following: a certificate in cannabis biology and chemistry, a certificate titled the Jake Jabs Certificate in professional entrepreneurship, a post-baccalaureate certificate in cannabis biology and chemistry, a post-baccalaureate certificate in principal school leadership, a new graduate degree, Masters of Engineering Management, another one titled Masters of Science in Cannabis Biology and Chemistry, and then our second approved doctoral program, a Doctorate of Education in Educational Leadership. I'm excited again about these new programs and credentials, and I'm excited because they're timely, they map to student interest and needs, and they have the potential to drive the economic development of our region. And I'm grateful to our faculty because they are sitting down and they are doing the hard work and developing these new academic programs. And then our faculty senate for their careful review of the curriculum and then preparing proposals for the Board of Governors for their consideration. As I've said before, curriculum has a shelf life or a use before date, like fruits and vegetables. Our curriculum is always in need of revision and updating. What students need today is not what they needed 5 years ago. And rather than purging or deleting programs, I recommend we modernize programs. And I know that this modernization is occurring on the campus. I reviewed enrollment trends in 55 of our programs over the holiday break, and I noticed enrollment growth in 18 of the 55 programs. And the enrollment growth was the result of faculty who are modernizing their curriculum. I consider this significant, especially when enrollments have been trending down. Other new programs that have provided much needed strategic enrollment growth include undergraduate degree programs in our health sciences, cannabis biology and chemistry, and early childhood education. New graduate programs in nursing and social work, and online graduate and undergraduate programs in education, business, and nursing. We have opened new pathways for students who have applied associate degrees to seamlessly complete their 4-year education through a bachelor's of applied science degrees in health sciences, leadership and management, and automotive industry management. I consider these to be very forward-facing, very innovative, and we're leaders in the state of Colorado. Also very important is the combined 3+2 programs, and they're expanding their appeal to our students. Programs such as athletic training, history, and others have developed or are developing such options for our students. I'm also happy to report that several CSU Pueblo academic programs have been ranked nationally by U.S. News and World Report and other independent ranking organizations, and we continue to be recognized as providing strong upward mobility for our graduates. In fact, we are ranked by U.S. News and World Report as the best Colorado university in our category in providing students with significant upward mobility. For overall rankings among public regional universities of the West, U.S. News and World Report ranks us above all other Colorado universities with the exception of one. I also need to recognize the exciting partnerships that some of our academic departments are forging with community colleges. And this I consider to be pretty amazing. The School of Nursing has an articulation agreement with Arapahoe Community College, providing their students an opportunity to complete the RN to BSN at Arapahoe Community College, and then with a careful alignment of courses and credits, allowing a community college student to then earn a Master's of Science in Nursing in a very time and tuition sensitive manner. I know that the president of Arapahoe Community College and her faculty are very excited about that new development. The Hassan School of Business has been the leader in working with community colleges, and they did this with a new cybersecurity and secure software program where students are simultaneously enrolled at both Arapahoe Community College and CSU Pueblo. So a brand new student to Arapahoe Community College enrolls at both of our institutions at the same time. And students complete CSU Pueblo courses on the Arapahoe Community College campus in Castle Rock, and they start taking CSU Pueblo courses in their very first semester at Arapahoe Community College. All of this is incredibly innovative and is gaining some traction and driving enrollment. Also driving the curriculum innovation in academic affairs is our Department of Extended Studies. They continue to find ways to reach both niche and underserved markets, including adult learning. I applaud the academic units who are partnering with Extended Studies. Their success in providing students with just-in-time educational programming has contributed significantly to the bottom line of our university. The fourth out of 5 themes that I'd like to talk about are health is in relationship to student success. We have been working hard over the past 2 years to enhance learning and support systems that allow more of our students to be successful. And we're beginning to see some incremental success despite a pandemic. If you will remember, I talked about this at my opening convocation in the fall of 2017. I talked about university presidents who often obsess around the metrics or the outcomes without changing anything to produce a different outcome. And I said, we're going to do that differently. Rather than obsessing on the outcomes, let's obsess about the learning and the support systems. And if we get that right, the metrics and the outcomes will follow. And we're beginning to see some incremental success. We have introduced and invested over $1 million in a new professional advising system that we refer to as the PAC Center. This center serves as a student support network, and it includes faculty and student mentors, career coaches, and academic success coaches, all working together in a coordinated manner to ensure that a student is successful. The PAC Center ensures that every student, even those who remain undecided about their major, has a pathway forward, and this pathway maps to students' academic plans and early career goals, and makes available tools to help students remain emotionally and physically healthy, as well as resources to help them navigate their academics through appropriate tutoring and mentoring. This is not the advising center that many of us are familiar with. The PAC Center, including faculty and student peer mentors, work with students during their entire time of enrollment, with one set of academic success coaches focusing on new students and another set of academic success coaches assisting students with their higher level coursework, teaming with faculty mentors. The PAC Center also introduces students to early career exploration opportunities through CSU Pueblo Works. This is a program that can allow students to get paid for work experiences related to their academic experiences, making higher ed more affordable for them. Upper division students are expected to engage in a number of profession-based experiences, including internships, clinicals, capstone projects, and discovery programs, to name a few, that will allow them to prepare portfolios of work that they will use to transition to professional life. Another part of our learning system where we have invested additional resources is in coordinating our tutoring and our academic support programs, including the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences Learning Center, an online writing lab, a writing center, the Science Learning Center, and Education Mentoring and Student Support Center. I am grateful to Abby Davison, like many of you, and all of her colleagues who staff these academic support services. In the year ahead, we're going to intensify a university-wide equity discussion on student success, including student retention, persistence, and their completion rates. This work is not new, and it started with Vision 2028. We've always had this focus, but what has changed is that our governing board is also very interested in better understanding how they can support our student efforts. And I believe getting our governing board involved was the result of Vision 2028. So what does all of this mean? We are taking a more data-driven and systematic approach to understanding what is keeping our students from retaining or completing their degree. We want to better understand the problem. The second is with funding made possible through Vision 2028 and special funding from the system, we are implementing interventions such as tutoring and supplemental instruction, and we will continue to refine our interventions based on what we learn from the data and by engaging each of you in conversations. And then finally, third, is we will be reporting out on a more regular basis to you and the Board of Governors the impact of our interventions. Today, I wanted to elevate this university-wide approach to better understanding student success with all of you, and this is the work that is in front of us. Finally, I'd like to talk about the cultural health of CSU Pueblo. The culture of CSU Pueblo is slowly changing. Organizational culture is reflected in how we treat each other and how we do our work. Although we've made progress, and I think you have seen and heard that as I've talked about that today, more work is needed. Our new vision, mission, values, and guiding principles have provided us with a clear identity about who we are as an institution and who we serve. I have seen us using our guiding principles to prioritize work and how we set agendas. I hear us using the language of our vision, which allows me to see that we've internalized our identity. I have seen faculty and academic leaders working in a more innovative and interdisciplinary manner, and I hope I've allowed you to see that today. As your leader, and this is important to me, I want you to find joy in your work. I want you to feel included. I want you to feel as though your work makes a difference. I want you to feel that you and your work are valued. All of this is called job satisfaction. And in order for us to have more job satisfaction, we need less job dissatisfaction. And job dissatisfiers include when the technology is not working, when your working conditions are not safe or appropriate, when you lack trust in your leadership, or when you're not compensated at a market rate. As we work to reduce job dissatisfaction, we're also working hard to increase job satisfaction, which is providing our employees with professional development opportunities or ways that they can grow. We recently completed a compensation analysis, and I presented the results of that analysis at our fall 2021 convocation. Specifically, we need approximately $300,000 in permanent funding to get our faculty to approximately 90% of market. We need $100,000 to get our administrative professionals to 90% of market, and we need another $55,000 to address compensation concerns among our classified employees. I want to remind everyone of the difference between COLA and merit, and COLA stands for cost of living adjustments. We used to administer increases, salary increases when available to all employees across the board, regardless of job performance. This was called a COLA adjustment. This compensation practice has been discontinued. Today, we administer compensation on a merit-based system and award increases based on job performance. Our goal is to get all employees to 90% of market, which I believe is doable, but it's going to require some tough decisions. As a higher education organization, and at CSU Pueblo, the greatest compensation concerns are with our faculty. Although we budgeted for a 3% increase in merit compensation to be administered this month, our student melt rate, or the number of students we expect to return for the spring 22 semester, is expected to be larger than what we budgeted due to the pandemic. If the melt rate comes in larger than what was budgeted, we will not be able to provide merit increases for the spring 2022 semester. I know this is disappointing to many. And again, it is dependent on what happens in the next couple of weeks. What I'd also like you to know is that we are contractually obligated to increase classified staff salaries by 3%. And this has already been budgeted. And because our faculty are significantly off market, I have authorized Dr. Abdulrahman to use his academic budgetary savings. It's approximately $100,000 that he has collected through salary savings, restructuring, and faculty workload enhancements to address equity adjustments among select faculty members. Following a process articulated in the faculty handbook, Dr. Abdulrahman will seek recommendations for equity adjustments from his deans, as well as the Faculty Senate's Compensation Committee. Again, these academic savings have been generated through academic affairs operating in a more efficient and cost-effective manner and does not have any impact on our fiscal year 22 budget. I know many of you are interested in what we're going to be doing to enhance the reliability of our technology. We have received a set of recommendations from our consultant, and Chris Milliken and Dr. Abdulrahman are currently putting together a multi-year plan to put these recommendations into practice. Here is what we're going to be doing immediately that I want you to know about. We are hiring 2 new IT professionals who will work to improve budget management and drive IT enhancements on the campus. We are investing $200,000 in migrating the campus to Microsoft 365, which will address many of the concerns you have voiced, including email capacity, as well as upgrading our desktop management tools to include industry standards, including email, calendaring, team meetings, and other time enhancers. This migration will be complete in June of 22. We are also investing in our connectivity infrastructure, which will enhance our Wi-Fi connectivity on the campus. You will experience enhancements by the end of the year. And then finally, I will be recommending to the leadership team next week that we hire an additional 2 IT technicians to enhance service operations across the campus. We remain grateful to the CSU system for helping us upgrade our technology infrastructure, which will add capacity to what we're able to do as a university. We are currently implementing Banner, our new student information system, and will begin implementing a new human resource information system soon. Finally, with funding from Vision 2028, we've been able to add a position in human resources to focus on employee relations. Many of you know Jennifer Martin White, who's done an incredible job of looking after us, especially during the pandemic. And I should say all the folks in HR have been doing a remarkable job. Jennifer and her colleagues have recently launched a set of cultural competency programs, training programs, and throughout the year 2022, she will be introducing a set of professional development opportunities for many of us through the Franklin Covey Leadership Organization. So in conclusion, I wanted to share with you the health of our university, and specifically the health of our finances, enrollment, academics, student success, and our culture. In each of the areas, I discussed the progress we've made together, but also the work that is in front of us. And as I talk about our work, I hope you were able to see your fingerprints on the work. The work that I've talked about today was completed by each of you, and it's work that I'm incredibly proud of. Each of you are making significant contributions to this institution, and that work is expanding our appeal of our campus, it's enhancing student success, and it's allowing us to develop our people. I thank you in advance for working together as a team to support our students and each other during the next 2 critical weeks for our university. And why is this? Here's why. We have a larger than normal number of students who have yet not registered for the spring semester. We expect that they will be trying to re-enroll this week. While they're trying to do this, we have a large number of team members who are out ill because of the pandemic. we are running many of our offices at skeletal staffing. This is very similar to the airlines who cannot meet their schedule due to employees being out ill. I ask that we work together this week to help each other and get our students all the services they need. The cabinet met for 2 hours this past Friday and made the following decisions after consulting with the Faculty Senate, the Academic Council, the Classified Staff Council, and the Administrative Professional Council. Under consideration was whether we should delay the start of our semester by 1 week. Based on stakeholder feedback and a number of good discussions, we decided not to do this, but instead we are going to delay by a week the time when students are allowed to add courses. We recognize that this will require additional time and attention of our faculty to get students up to speed who add late, and we thank them in advance. We also made the decision to temporarily increase the accounts receivable threshold with which students can enroll from $500 to $1,500. So anyone with a balance of $1,500 or less, that financial hold will be lifted, allowing those students to get re-enrolled in the university. We also made the hard decision not to remove any immunization holds in order to protect the safety and the security of the campus. For the next 2 weeks, I need all of us to prioritize helping our students get re-enrolled, knowing that we're going to be short on staff. This may mean putting other work on hold. I also ask that all supervisors be available to provide support for their staff who may be working with fewer staff members than usual. And I ask that supervisors and directors keep your vice presidents informed of what is needed to get the job done. This afternoon, I will be forwarding an important email asking for your assistance in helping our students get registered and enrolled during the next 2 weeks. I ask that you take a few minutes and read this important communication, and that again will be coming to you later on this afternoon. That concludes my State of the University address, where I wanted to share with you where we've been for the last 5 years and the work that has been completed that I'm proud of, but also the work that is in front of us. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our new Distinguished University Professor, which again is the highest honor bestowed on a CSU Pueblo faculty member. The Distinguished University Professor designation will be a part of the recipient's formal title and will remain a part of their title upon retirement. The recipient of the Distinguished University Professor Award will conduct a workshop for faculty and will also deliver the Distinguished University Professor Lecture, and that is open to the public. At this time, it is my honor to introduce Dr. George Dallum as CSU Pueblo's third Distinguished University Professor. Dr. Dallum is a professor of exercise science, physical education, and recreation, and has been at CSU Pueblo for over 23 years. One of his nominators writes, Dr. Dallum has demonstrated sustained exceptional performance in all of the required areas over his 20+ year career at CSU Pueblo. I've often reached out to him for support in my efforts in classes for his expert opinion. I have seen Dr. Dallum assist junior faculty in their research, and he assists them in their tenure efforts. In my opinion, Dr. Dallum is humble in highlighting his accomplishments over the course of his career. Another nominator writes, as George Dallum's supervisor and colleague for over 20 years, and that narrows it down quite a bit, I've had the pleasure of witnessing and evaluating his performance. George Dallum is an excellent, high-quality academic professional. He is inspirational, creative, and truly cares for the student as an individual, the field of exercise science, and the concept of lifelong learning. I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to work with an individual who is so motivated to make a difference through higher education. Here is what else you need to know about Dr. Dallum. He has won the university's top teaching, research, and service awards over his 23 years. And I believe, after I reviewed his resume and his vita, I believe he's received some of those top awards more than once. He has consistently taught 12 credit hours every semester over his 23 years of employment. He's had a few semesters of reassigned time for committee work. He receives some of the highest student evaluations of instruction in the college over those years, with an average of 4.5 or higher most years. Dr. Dallum has served the university by developing and redeveloping curriculum, serving on retention committees, and serving the Faculty Senate as a longtime member of the Faculty Compensation Committee. Dr. Dallum has over 50 peer-reviewed publications, books, and book chapters, and I know that he is about to complete a new book that he's been working on over the last semester's sabbatical, titled Nasal Breathing Paradox During Exercise. And I know that concept has received quite a bit of attention. Dr. Dallum is also a former inaugural national teams coach for USA Triathlon and worked for many years with elite US triathletes as a coach, advisor, and consultant. Finally, Dr. Dallum has been continuously training and competing in triathlon since 1981 and has recently also begun playing water polo again as a master's athlete. Colleagues, help me congratulate our third distinguished university professor, Dr. George Dallum. Dr. Dallum, we're going to turn it over to you for I see you got your bike in the back, but a few words from you about this recognition.
Well, I'd just like to say how honored I am to receive this sort of recognition. You know, I feel like I was very privileged to work in higher education, and in particularly at CSU Pueblo. And I guess I would want to underscore one thing and kind of echo comments that you made earlier, Dr. Mottet. In general, you know, we don't do these things by ourselves. So, you know, being a person who has a background in athletics, we have a sort of a phrase that we use quite a bit. There's no I in team. What that means is, you know, when you recognize somebody individually, as you're doing here, really what you're recognizing is what the team has done, right? And so I consider that that's our college, now our school, our university in general, the kinds of things that that I've been lucky enough to be involved in my career. They're really a function of everyone working together. They're not a function of one person. And so, you know, I thank my colleagues, the amazing students that I've had over the years and continue to have, colleagues who are long gone now and colleagues who are emerging and are beginning with us. You know, really we're honoring everyone when we do this sort of thing. An individual is really just a part of a big process in higher education. And again, I feel really privileged to have been able to do that with my career.
And Dr. Dallum, I'd also like to acknowledge, because I think this is also important when you talk about the community, that would be your family. I know that you've made many sacrifices as a professor in higher ed, and I want to congratulate your family as they have supported you throughout your professional career as well.
I appreciate that. And I might note that recently my wife, who works in well, it's a form of higher ed. Basically, it's the honor or the early colleges kinds of programs we have here in Colorado Springs. We're now collaborating with CSU Pueblo. Just recently, we formed that. They formed that articulation. I don't think a formal articulation agreement is in place yet, but they're forming that relationship. So
very good.
It is a big family. It is a big family.
Well, congratulations. You're the third. You join an elite core of our distinguished university faculty members, and very proud of you. And I thank you for, on behalf of the university, for all the ways that you've served our students and the rest of the campus and the local community as well. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You bet. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning's opening convocation. Mr. Brandon Boosty is Chief Partnership Officer and Global Head of Learn Work Innovation at Kaplan. He leads Kaplan's work in serving U.S. universities and employers leveraging the organization's highly diversified global educational offerings and insights. His mission is to help U.S. higher education and employers adapt, grow, and thrive. And prior to Kaplan, Brandon Boostede was global head of public sector at Gallup, serving higher education, government, and foundations. In that role, Brandon led dozens of groundbreaking studies and consulted with hundreds of higher education leaders. An internationally known speaker and author on education and workforce development, Mr. Boostede has published more than 100 articles and keynoted more than 200 conferences. He was named LinkedIn Top Voice in Education and is a frequent contributor to Forbes. Brandon Boostede serves on the board of directors for the Association of American Colleges and Universities and is a member of the Business Higher Education Forum. Colleagues, if you would help me welcome to Colorado State University, Pueblo, Mr. Brandon Boostede. Brandon, we're delighted to have you with us today.
Hey, thanks so much, President Mottet, and it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm sorry that it's not in person. I was very much looking forward to being there physically, but alas, we'll reschedule the visit to campus at some point, and I'm delighted that it's at least been able to continue forward here virtually. So I wanted to take some time per the topic of my comments today about the merger of learning and work to first highlight some of the really important headwinds and also opportunities surrounding higher education. And then importantly, to dive into the nuances of what really makes this thing we call college work, right? So when it works, the power of it, the essence of it, right? What are those components? What are the magic ingredients of college, if you will? And this stems from a lot of the research that I was able to lead during my 7 years when I was at Gallup. One of the major studies that I led there was the largest representative study of college graduates in US history, looking at their long-term outcomes on a number of dimensions. Certainly things like earnings, career trajectory, but also their overall well-being, how they rate their lives on multiple dimensions, the engagement in their work. So not simply measuring how much money somebody makes, but we all know that there is a major factor around what makes for successful work based on the degree to which you're engaged in that work, that you are able to do the things that you're really great at, things that you might be really interested and passionate about. And so that study looked at the relationship between those various long-term outcomes and the kinds of experiences that students had during that. So I'm going to be unpacking a lot of those findings in addition to a bunch of other research and insights that I've had the privilege to be part of during my career, and also kind of taking it through the lens of a fairly diversified set of activities that I've had across my career. So we're going to have time for Q&A as well. So as folks have comments or questions, certainly have those in mind, and we're definitely going to have some good room for that. So first of all, thank you for the invitation to be able to be here today. I want to start with the first most important point, and that is that although we value higher education for many reasons, right? When you ask people why they value higher education, there are a whole host of reasons, right? But this is the most important takeaway, that by far the number one reason why we value it is to get a good or better job. There really isn't a close second or third place. So yes, we value it because we want to be well-rounded. We value it because we want to be prepared for engaged citizenship. We value it for other attributes like trying to become lifelong learners, etc. But all those things pale in comparison to the number one reason why Americans value higher ed, seek it out, and that is to get a good or better job. Now, this is the key insight that kind of frames all of my comments from here, because you see, if we get that premise wrong, right? If we don't understand that as the driving goal for most people who pursue higher education, we're missing the point. We're missing incredible opportunities. And so here's the thing, though, that I worry about a lot, that although that's the number one reason why we value it, there are some serious doubts across almost all constituencies and stakeholders about how well higher education is doing in that regard. President Mottet pointed out a number of initiatives that CSU Pueblo has underway that are incredibly aligned to building the success of students and graduates to become more work ready and successful in their careers. And you're going to hear in my comments several of those things unpacked through the research. So the first thing I have to say is, first of all, kudos to CSU Pueblo and the efforts that have been underway for a while there and are continuing to build, because you're going to hear a lot of alignment between the kinds of things that are already happening there and what some of my general advice is in terms of ultimate success. And I think what you're going to also hear are points that are helpful to individual students, to staff and faculty, but also at an institutional level, insights that are takeaways in terms of what institutions can do differently or better. So here's what I mentioned about the doubts of work readiness of college graduates, because when you survey the US general population, for example, only 13% of American adults strongly agree that college graduates are well prepared for success in the workplace. That is not a strong vote of confidence. In fact, it would probably be considered on the flip side, more a vote of no confidence in the work readiness of graduates. Now, when you survey C-level business executives, for example, only about 11% strongly agree to a similar statement about the work readiness of college graduates. And one point that I found rather ironic and disappointing is that I was involved in a survey of trustees of colleges and universities in the United States. And it turns out they're actually the most skeptical on this, because about 6% of college and university trustees strongly agree to a similar statement about the work readiness of graduates. So when you kind of look at that from that perspective, you realize that there's probably both a perception and reality gap between this number one reason why we value higher ed to get a good or better job and how well we're doing on it. Now, I don't need to go into a lot of details about some of the perception pieces, but this isn't just a falling down on the part of college and universities, right? There's a lot of things in the mix here. And one of the big ones is what employers are doing, or I should say not doing on their end of things. But let me just point out one of the perception issues that we have in higher ed, because a lot of higher education institutions believe deeply in the power of liberal arts or arts and humanities. And what's interesting is that when you do brand testing of the words liberal and arts, and this has been true for a number of years, it just doesn't resonate. So those of us who might have had parents who went to college and went through a liberal arts degree, they certainly understand it. But when you start to think about the small percentages of those who have a solid understanding via their own experiences or parents' experiences, and you just test the words liberal and arts, although they have different meaning, there's all kinds of problems, right? So first of all, people think there's a political definition of liberal. That's not the case here. But when you hear liberal arts, right, you think, oh, liberal politically. When you hear the term art, you think, wow, that doesn't really lead to a good job, or people just don't understand what it is. So I bring this up as a simple example because a lot of institutions will heavily market the fact that they are a liberal arts institution. They will say that loud and proud. And the reality is that that's a brand. Those are words and a terminology that's not resonating. And it's disappointing because, of course, what undergirds the liberal arts, right? Things like critical thinking and skilled communication, collaboration, cultural understanding, right? The attributes of a liberal arts education are as valuable as they've ever been, but the words and the brand are getting in the way. An interesting study of parents of high school students, for example, when asked about the best path to a good job for their child, they were more likely to say no college degree at all than a liberal arts degree as a best path to a good job. So that just kind of puts a fine point on the huge perception issues we have with some of the terminology that's used in higher education. So now, putting that aside, right, I want to segue back to the reality aspects of this gap between the work readiness of college graduates and the perceptions of that work readiness. And there's some interesting questions, right? Like, why aren't college graduates as work ready as they should or could be? What does it mean to be work ready, right? There's a really good one. Okay, so if we're trying to get to that, let's describe what that really looks like, right? And what are the kinds of experiences, educational and otherwise, that get somebody to that place? What are those magic ingredients of college and work readiness? And in short, right, as I'll kind of unpack some of this in my introductory comments, most of the story is about the integration of learning and work, where there's synergies between what we think of as the more classic academic experience of college and the application of that in any number of applied situations, right? And we could call it work generally. It also applies in research and a number of other frameworks. But this is about trying to get to a place where we all do a better job at a student level, at a staff and faculty level, at an institutional prioritization level, and quite frankly, at an employer level, of integrating learning and work. So here's the interesting thing, right? I mentioned that these C-level business executives are pretty negative about the work readiness of college graduates. Well, when you ask that same population, okay, what is it that you want to see most from a college graduate? Their number one answer, this is unaided, open-ended responses, is some sort of job or internship experience for that student. Well, newsflash, employers, colleges and universities don't usually have internships and job opportunities. I mean, to a limited degree, right? A work study opportunity on campus, et cetera. But the point here is that employers of all shapes and sizes, for-profit, nonprofit, government, they're the ones fundamentally who are the sources of internships or co-ops or whatever else we might want to frame, apprenticeship, right? All the derivatives of learn-work integration. And so it's interesting that they say the number one thing they want to see from graduates is an internship. They're the ones that obviously need to step up more to the plate and offering more of those.
Where did she go?
So in addition, there's a big question about the difference between unpaid and paid internships. So although on one hand, you could say, wow, it's better to have some kind of work experience than not, I will tell you that there's emerging data that there is a real equity issue from the fact that we continue to allow unpaid internships for employers in this country. I've written an article in Forbes about how we need to ban unpaid internships. It's not because I don't believe in work integrated learning. I do a lot, but where we're starting to see major equity and inclusion issues, because guess what? Students who can't afford to work for free in an unpaid internship, they don't have the opportunity. Or think about an internship in an expensive city like Washington, D.C., where there might be an internship available, but you can't afford to live in Washington, right? These are major issues that we need to get over. It's not just higher education needs to solve for this. It's all of our employers, and not just the Fortune 500, but all the small and medium-sized employers that are major drivers of our local economies and communities. So let's talk about the elements that help make a graduate work ready. And this is driven by the research and some of the things I mentioned earlier about the large study I was involved in, right? Linked to the likelihood that you have higher well-being later in life, that you're more engaged in the work, that you're making more money on average. And there's just a handful of things that are really drivers of that from a work integrated learning perspective. One would be that you have worked on at least one long-term project that took a semester or more to complete. So that sounds relatively simple, right? Many of you are probably going, oh, well, okay, yeah, I've done one of those, or I'm going to do one of those, or you might be a faculty member who teaches a capstone program or has a course that involves a long-term project. The reality, though, is that only about a third of college graduates in the United States report having had a long-term project that took a semester or more to complete. Now, when I first saw that, I was a little taken aback by it because I kind of figured like, well, doesn't everybody who gets a bachelor's degree end up with at least one of those? The reality is not so fast. And when we start to think about why students don't always go down pathways that involve capstone courses and things like that, partly is their majors might offer less of this than other majors, but it's also students choosing to avoid courses like that. Why? Because they're worried about getting a lower grade. They think GPA is the single most important thing for their success later in life. And so they make a trade-off. They take a less challenging course to try and get a higher GPA because, of course, that's the magic formula, right? Or is it? Well, here's an interesting little tidbit. Employers would rather hire a B student with an internship than an A student without one. And this is not to say that they don't value grades. And it's not me saying, hey, don't worry about your grades. Grades matter, but they're not the only thing that matters, right? Having a broad set of work integrated learning experiences, multiple long-term projects, those are things that are going to challenge you and take you to a place where you build some of the skill sets that are most valued in all workplaces today. So that's the first ingredient, right? At least one, if not more, long-term projects. What's the other value of a long-term project? In many cases, you get to have a really specific portfolio or something you can show an employer as part of an interview process, right? Beyond a GPA, you can say, oh, well, I worked on this particular project. Here's what we did as part of our team, et cetera, right? So you can see where this becomes really valuable, not just from the experience, but in being able to market that experience to a prospective employer. The other piece, and I've mentioned it, is having some form of an internship, a co-op, a micro internship. There's a lot of different nuances and terminology in this, right? But it's in simple terms, a work experience that was connected to your learning. And this is really interesting insight because in the research, there were questions asked of these graduates in the study about whether they worked in a paid job during college. It was kind of a yes or no answer, right? Did you have a paid job during college? Yes or no. Separately in the study, there was a question about whether you had a job or an internship where you were able to apply what you were learning in the classroom. And it turns out that part of that question and phrase are really, really important. Because for the graduates who said, yes, they had a paid job during college, but said no to the other question, there was no relationship to having a paid job in college and success later in life. None whatsoever. Now, again, I'm not saying you shouldn't have a paid job during college or that didn't matter, because obviously if you were making money, that money was being put towards paying bills, tuition, whatever. So from that perspective, absolutely fantastic experience. But see, it was the integration of I had a job or an internship, and somewhere there was connectivity, either because I made that connectivity, right? Or a professor of mine made that connectivity, or a program that I was part of made that connection formally. But I got to see the synergies between what I was learning in the classroom and the ways in which I was applying that or observing how it might be applied in any number of workplaces. So that's where the magic really comes to life. So when you see programs at CSU Pueblo that encourage work integrated learning and those synergies between the more traditional academic work and the experiences, those are the kinds of things that if I were giving the student advice, seek them out. Seek out those courses, seek out those professors who draw some of those linkages. And I'm going to come back and talk about mentors and faculty very specifically in just a minute. But the other category is to make sure that somehow before you leave and before you finish your diploma, in addition to getting a degree, that you also find a way to build some high value, in demand, specific skills that are valued in industry. And that might include getting an industry recognized credential while you're also pursuing your degree. Now you might go, wow, that sounds overwhelming. Like it's hard enough to go, to finish my degree and to get through all that. Like, what are you talking about adding here? Well, guess what? There's a lot of industry recognized credentials that don't take that much time and energy to get through. I can think of any number of designations in cybersecurity. I can think of things like project management. I can think of things in financial services. There's all kinds of high value industry recognized credentials that can be pursued and obtained during or the course of the academic nooks and crannies, right? Between breaks, winter breaks, summer, etc. But to think about how you leave with both a degree and some sort of definable industry skill set. That is something that in the market research resonates tremendously. So let me give you a quick example. One of the survey questions that was asked of hiring managers, knowing nothing else about the following three graduates, which would you be most likely to hire? And the answers were a recent graduate with a bachelor's degree in English, a recent graduate with a bachelor's degree in cybersecurity, and the third was a recent graduate with a bachelor's degree in English and a designation in cybersecurity. Now, here's the interesting point, because if you think about just the bachelor's degree between English and cybersecurity is a white hot field. You would think that employers would be many times more likely to just say, oh, I'll take that student who got a bachelor's degree in cybersecurity. Interestingly enough, the big winner in this was the bachelor's degree in English, who also had a cybersecurity designation, an industry recognized credential. The credential here that was referenced as an example was a certified ethical hacker. Employers were 4 times more likely to hire that English graduate with the certified ethical hacker designation over the English grad. And they were 3 times more likely to hire that English graduate over the bachelor's degree in cybersecurity. So what that also tells you is that employers value being broadly educated, right? It's not that they don't value the liberal arts or degrees like an English degree. They do, they value it very much, but what they also want to see with it is an industry specific skill and some sort of job related work experience. So I hope these insights are really starting to become pretty clear in terms of what we've learned. And then I'll just finish on one of the biggest ones. And in fact, I would argue the biggest one, and that is the degree to which you have had a mentor during your time in college who has encouraged your goals and dreams. It's a very strongly worded statement in the survey research, right? The statement was, I had a mentor who encouraged my goals and dreams. Well, there's a couple things to kind of be aware of there. One, how can I encourage your goals and dreams if I don't know what they are? Or if as a staff or faculty member, I've never bothered to ask that of the students that I interact with. That's a really important foundational step. And I know it sounds really simple, really silly in some respects, right? But that's kind of where the threshold of mentorship starts, right? It starts with trying to get to understand students at a more individual or personalized level, asking them questions about what their aspirations and goals are. Some are very specific, they have clear plans, others aren't so sure, but just the act of asking those questions improves the likelihood that they're more successful later. In fact, in the research, just one conversation with a faculty member about careers or jobs at some point during your academic career increases your confidence in getting a job after graduation and increases the likelihood that you have a job faster upon graduation than graduates who hadn't had any conversations with faculty. So I take that as an incredible opportunity, and huge kudos to the faculty and the impact that faculty can make on students. Here's the trick though. Only 2 out of 10 college graduates in the United States strongly agreed that they had a mentor who encouraged their goals and dreams. So 8 out of 10 are sort of missing the mark. Our opportunities to increase our value of mentoring, right, are absolutely paramount to the success of higher education. And I think it's the kind of thing that an institution like CSU Pueblo in particular can actually get ahead of other institutions on, right, by just simply stating it as a value and getting incentives and policies and any number of other things behind it to make sure that it's successful. Now, when you think about all these things I've mentioned, right, long-term projects that take a semester or more to complete, internships or co-op experiences where you're able to see the connectivity between that work and what you're doing academically, getting a specific industry skill or industry recognized credential as part of your experience and having a mentoring relationship. Why do these things matter, right? Like what are the aspects of what's happening there? Well, think about it. Collaboration, feedback, iteration, context, application. All of these are things that happen as part of those experiences. And I'll just leave you with one really important point as we segue to the fireside chat that I'm going to have with President Mottet and then the Q&A session. And that is the point about what makes for what accounts for 70% of workplace engagement for somebody in their job. 70% of workplace engagement, whether you're engaged in your job or not, is accounted for by who your manager is in that job. So you say, well, why is it important to have a mentoring experience during college? Because when you understand what a good mentor looks like, feels like, right, what that experience is like, it gives you a sense for what a good manager looks like, feels like, right, what that experience is. And it makes you smarter in determining whether or not the job you might be taking is working for somebody who is a good supportive manager. In simple terms, right, whether you like your job or not is heavily dependent on who your manager is. And I bring this up because especially for young graduates who might be taking their first job, or for people who are in a new industry and thinking about, oh, wow, let's be hopeful that we get one or more job offerings as part of this, right? If I have the ability to choose, is it about the benefits? Is it about the pay? Is it about the name brand of the company? I mean, sure, those things matter to a small degree, but in the grand scheme of things, they pale in comparison to who your manager is. So when you have this opportunity, right, think about interviewing the manager. Yes, they're going to interview you for the job, but where you have that opportunity at the end of the interviews where they say things like, oh, and do you have any questions for me? You want to try to suss out whether this is somebody who cares about you as an individual, whether this is somebody who's going to be more likely to look at your strengths and build upon those as opposed to harping on your weaknesses and constantly being critical of that. And so I say this because for all of us, I think it's an incredible insight to think about, you know, hey, if I want to have a great job largely dependent on who your manager is, whether that's a supportive individual or somebody that, for example, on the opposite end of the scale, the worst thing you'd want from a manager is somebody who just ignores you entirely. So I hope I've given you some practical examples here. I've unpacked some of these key successes for helping build work-ready graduates. And I would love to just go ahead and segue, Dr. Mottet, to the discussion time that we had planned.
You bet. Thank you, Brandon, for your message. And I asked you to call me Tim, please.
No problem. Happy to do it.
Okay. I want to pick up on several. I had 3 questions, but I have other questions based on what I'm hearing you talk about today. And I'll ask Donna to keep us on track. Once we need to move out of this Q&A, we'll move it into the larger Q&A. But so you've talked about a lot of research that has been done. From your perspective, how receptive do you feel higher ed has been to the research, and are they beginning to make the shifts?
I mean, look, I think there's been a lot of receptivity to it across the board, right? With senior administration, with faculty, especially where I've had the opportunity to, you know, give talks at conferences that have largely been comprised of faculty members, student affairs staff, certainly a community that resonates with career services. I think the big issue, Tim, is just simply then how fast and aggressive are institutions moving against these insights. And I think the biggest issue that I continue to see are institutions who will listen to a talk like I just gave, right? And say, okay, I get it. Yeah, internships, long-term projects. Yeah, we do all that. And then this is the tough question I ask where it starts to fall down. And I say, okay, well, great. You probably have an example of all of those things at some part of the institution, right? We have a program here that does blah, 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 right? But if I say, what % of your graduates are hitting the mark on all of those things that I just discussed? That's where the percentages get really low. So our big issue here is not that we aren't doing it, it's that we haven't scaled it and we haven't made it intentional. Any institution that I've seen make an intentional commitment to these kinds of work integrated learning experiences, guess what? They start to figure out a way to get there and to help more students get there, a higher percentage of those students get there. So it's not that we're not doing it, but what I say is the big warning to all of higher ed is if you feel like you're doing a really good job, ask yourself the tough question. What percentage of graduates are we hitting the mark for, right? And that's usually where a lot of folks will go, yeah, you know, maybe I'm not as satisfied as I thought I was based on that. So my big push is to say this has to be intentional and we have to think about it at scale, because just an example at a programmatic level, it's not going to cut it.
I think the intentionality there that I think is important is you mentioned earlier the application piece. Are students actually able to apply what they're doing to what they're learning? And you said that without that, you're missing that kind of connective tissue. I've talked about before John Dewey, a person who's pretty important to me, but he talked a lot about, we take great pride in experiential learning on our campus. And John Dewey said, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on our experience. And I think that is the part of the intentionality, the meaningfulness is helping students make the connections between an experience and what it is we want them to learn. I think that's an important part. I keep wanting to go back to that. Another question that I have for you is higher ed in the state of Colorado is very saturated. We're doing a lot of this work. if we had one bumper sticker to allow us to stand out in a crowded marketplace, knowing what you know of us, and based on what you know, what would a bumper sticker be that should be on our billboards that sets us apart in a crowded higher education marketplace?
Well, look, I mean, on the spot, I don't know if I'm going to give you the world's perfect bumper sticker, but I'll think about that, because those are things that I like to do. And to some of the points I made, the words we use to market what we do matter a lot, right? Like my point about the bad branding of liberal arts. Liberal arts isn't the problem; it's the words liberal arts that have taken on a very negative connotation, which is unfortunate. And so, you know, what we know resonates. This is interesting. Just if you get under the hood of it, and if you say things like critical thinking, skilled communication, collaboration, right? All those things resonate to employers, they resonate for parents, they resonate for individual students. But I think what's really happening here is it's about real experiences, students, graduates, right, with real experiences that are ready for the real world. Graduates with real experience that are ready for the real world. If I'm put on the spot, that's what I'm going with right now. And I think you guys have a lot of those attributes that are there. And, you know, I'll say something about, you know, the demographics that colleges and universities serve in the United States are incredibly varied, right? When you think about traditional age students in a residential facility versus working adults who are doing online courses versus the million international students we serve, think about the important differences between students who are coming as first generation students who have had no experience with higher ed in their immediate family. I mean, look, there's a varied population that we are trying to serve. And one of the things that I think is a strength of disproportionately first generation student populations is that, yes, although, you know, they have been underserved in many ways at a primary and secondary school level, they have less social capital in terms of getting internships and jobs and certain things like that. Disproportionately, there are also some of the students and graduates who have really had to work hard in many ways to get where they are, that have actually worked during their younger years. This is an interesting point. Today's 18 to 24-year-olds are the least working generation in US history. That is, they've worked the least in any reported form of working of any generation in the past 60 plus years of measurement. And one of the things that's driving that is very well-intentioned parents of, quite frankly, middle and upper class families who will say to their children, no, I don't want you to work because I want you to focus on getting good grades, or school is your work, right? And you can't necessarily fault that as a parenting strategy, but here's the big takeaway from that is that we've lost an appreciation for the learning value of work. And when I look at employers now who across the board are working so hard to build more diverse talent pipelines into their employer base and into their employee base, right? Like this is at once an opportunity for diverse students who we have not traditionally served very well, who employers have not embraced very well. But I think that learning value of work is embedded in the first generation community, right? In the immigration populations that are part of the United States. And I think that should be looked at as a strength, not a weakness, right? So that's an asset-based, not a deficit-based way of kind of viewing that.
And I think we have recognized that and are using that. What you just described does not describe our students. They all work, and they've been working for a number of years. So it's taking that work ethic and those that ability to work and making that work for them, and allowing them to see the value of that as well. I think it's important. You talked about language. I want to go back to that. The terminology around liberal arts, I get that. Is there other use of language and symbols in higher ed that we need to change? I almost feel like there's a glossary of terms that are no longer working. And what are those, and what do we need to be mindful? Again, I guess it's a little bit more of a marketing communication approach.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's general encouragement to say, you know, any new programs at launch or any new kind of rebranding initiative that's considered, right? It really does pay for itself to do really solid market research, right? To test various phrases and framings and things like that. And that's, I mean, honestly, you'd think that higher ed does that a lot. You know, we're used to doing research in many ways, right? Have we really turned that same rigorous research towards ourselves in terms of how we think about new program launches or whether we sunset certain programs, for example? I mean, that's all part of the calculus that we should be thinking about. But I think the one thing I worry most about, Tim, is just, and this certainly is not an attitude that exists at a CSU Pueblo, but across higher ed, there continues to be a certain hubris about higher education that is really increasingly turning people away from it, right? And if any of us have the mindset that, you know, geez, a college degree is the only path to success, right? Like, we all know it's a powerful driver of economic outcomes and, you know, a whole bunch of other things. We know that, right? But if we have the attitude that it's a degree or nothing, a degree or bust, right? That's where I worry about higher ed, because what I think higher ed institutions should be doing is embracing non-degree education as much as we do degree education. And we also know that non-degree education, certificates, short form courses, certain things like that, can be very strategically linked to the completion of degrees later through prior learning credits, through, you know, articulation of credits, right? Degrees, certificates that stack into degrees. Like, we need to do a lot more to embrace that non-degree aspect, because that's where a lot of those industry skills are taught. That's where, and my point about it is, it's a both and mentality that we have to have. I feel like a lot of higher ed has treated this as an either or, right? It's either college or it's technical or vocational training. And you know what? You look at technical and vocational training, it's doing more to integrate some of the kind of classic degree-based education, right? Skilled collaboration, communication. You look at where higher ed is going and some of its most effective pathways, it's taking, you know, the degree and enhancing it with skill and other work-based experiences. And look, this is happening even in the workplace. So get outside higher ed for a second. You know, you look at what is going to be required for most of us in any of the jobs that we're in to stay relevant in those jobs. I mean, it's going to be constant learning and training in various ways. And so that's the other side of this equation, where the learn work merger is taking place, is that your typical employer, more and more employees are going to spend more and more days each month on training, upskilling, and reskilling. And so you're going to get to a place where it's going to be hard to say, like, is this an employer or is this a university? Because there's going to be so much education and learning and training happening, and so much work integrated experiences happening, that those things are going to start to blur a little bit more.
Okay. And then finally, Donna, do I have more time for one more question? You alluded to it, but the prior learning assessment, being able to grant credit for students who are maybe non-traditional, maybe they're military, they bring a portfolio to the university. It is reviewed by faculty, and it's determined to give them credit for what they've already experienced. And where I think the need is to make sure that that maps to general education learning outcomes. Where the rub is, I believe, is that you've got a lot of general education faculty members who are wanting and desiring an outcome of their content, which is important. But as a university, the general education has these meta skills and competencies that we are wanting, and that is accomplished through these various disciplinary approaches. We want the critical thinking, the communication that you mentioned. And I believe some prior learning assessment can capture that, but it's not, and I think that needs to apply toward some general ed. Not everyone agrees with that. I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, look, we're always going to have the classic resistance to the idea of, well, if I didn't create it and you know, create the curriculum, right? Why would I recognize somebody else's curriculum or something, right? There's always going to be some level of resistance to that, right? Or we do it better here, or we do it differently here. And look, in some cases, yeah, there are some nuances where that might be the case. But in general, Tim, if you step back and you just say, the individual in America today who's thinking about college or not, right? And they've worked for 5 years or 10 years, or they were in the military. Military is a perfect example of this, right? I think of paramedics coming out of the military, right, who don't have qualifications. Like they're perfectly capable of being, in the medical field, but they have to like go back through new state level qualifications, all kinds. Like we put so many hurdles in front of people. The idea of an individual not being given recognition for the experiences they've already had, right, the things that they've already learned. And there's all kinds of ways we can do this. We can do competency-based assessments, right? So that has been largely taken up by some of the fastest growing universities in the country. You look at the Western Governors Universities and the Southern New Hampshire's and the Arizona State Universities. These are all 100,000 plus enrollment institutions now. You say, well, one of the reasons why they're growing is they're just heavily responsive to students and learners, right? And one of those big areas is in competency-based education, prior learning credits from work. I've been involved in a lot of work that Kaplan has supported with Purdue Global. About a third of the enrollments at Purdue Global are military. And there are very tight articulation agreements where there have been very careful look by the faculty at the training that these folks coming out of the military had in the military, and very, very clear alignment between that training and certain credits that apply towards programs and courses at Purdue Global. I mean, that for some people can accelerate them significantly towards their associate or bachelor's degree or master's degree. And that's just being responsive to an individual learner. It's not a shortcut, right? It's recognizing the investment they've already made. And so the big issue is taking the time and energy to carefully look at that prior learning, whether that's from a major employer, whether that's from the military. There's some elbow grease involved in that, Tim, but doing so is a path to recognizing the contributions of a learner, right? That have been part of what they've done before they have matriculated as a student. If you want more students to matriculate, if you want to help more people get a diploma, then we're going to have to do more of that. And I think over time, it's just like we're going to look back on this and go, why was there ever a controversy about prior learning and about articulating credits from certificate programs towards degrees? Like, I honestly think that we will be at that point where we'll be, why was there ever any resistance? The issue right now is it takes a little extra work and some elbow grease, but it's being responsive to learners. And I think that's the big driver here, is that we build a learner responsive institution, or the other way to look at it is we build an employer responsive institution.
Yeah. Thank you. Don, I'm going to turn it over to you to help facilitate a Q&A from our employee group, the campus community.
We have, as you may have noted, over 300 folks logged in and listening, and a quick scan suggests that we've got a lot of faculty. I think a lot of faculty are sending in the questions right now. Lots of our staff members representing every division across campus, from custodial to our PAC center for advising center opportunities. We have some students and some community members online listening today. So right now we have 13 questions. Some of them probably will get similar answers, so we'll do our best to go through these in order, Brandon. But the very first question that came in while you had just begun your keynote: what are the support systems and services that are critical to give students that semester-long project opportunity?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because I think trying to get to the level of detail and nuance around that is really critical, right? I mentioned that the underpinnings of a long-term project typically involve things like, not in all cases, but some group projects. So a lot of these long-term projects require group work, small groups or slightly larger groups. And of course, you get a lot of experience in the dynamics of working with a team, and who's carrying the weight and how do we delegate and certain things like that. You also usually get lots of feedback along the way that requires revisions and iteration, right? So this is a really powerful concept in learning, is iteration. So I come with an idea, and Donna's my advisor, and she gives me some input, and I go, oh wow, I didn't think of that, and I go back to the drawing board to a certain degree, and I reevaluate something, or she really challenges me hard on a particular point that I hadn't considered at all, right? So it's that iterative feedback that is usually part of a long-term project, right? That group interaction where multiple people might be involved in the work product that really drive home what it means to be part of that. And if you start to think about what happens in most workplaces, most of us aren't just taking, 5-question pop quizzes as part of our job, right? And we're involved in initiatives, projects that take months and in some cases years before they come to fruition. And so, knowing how to, kind of navigate that kind of process is really critical. But I think, here's one of the most important points. It's that process of constant feedback and iteration that I think is one of the biggest drivers of what makes a long-term project work. And so for faculty and staff and students on the student side who are involved in this, or TAs, right? It's just important to know that I mentioned that point about the worst manager you can have is somebody that just completely ignores you, doesn't give you any feedback at all. You'd rather have a manager that harps entirely on your weaknesses. That's not the best place to be, but that's way better than a manager who ignores you entirely. And the best manager would be somebody who thinks about what you're really good at and helps craft your job and your role in a way where you do more of those things that are your strengths. Well, if you think about that in the, the teacher faculty, framework, that's a really important part of it. So ignoring a student entirely, no feedback, no input, no direction whatsoever, worst place you can be. Hey, maybe I just have a good critical eye and I'm one of those people that gives critical feedback, way better than ignoring. But the best place to be would be to say, hey, Brandon's got some real natural talents in, public speaking. And I've noticed that and so how can I encourage that more? And, how can I help train him better in that respect? Like that's, I think, a lot of what comes from long-term projects. But here's one simple provocative thing that I'll ask this community. There's not a lot of research about what makes for a great internship. We got lots of internship experiences happening, but there's a dearth of good research about what makes for a great internship. And of course, you've got several pieces. You've got the student, you've got the employer, and then you've got the academic institution, right? Or you've got the student, a manager, and a faculty member, right? What are the key elements in that triangle that are really critical for success there? We actually don't know much about it. We know internships matter a lot, but we don't know a lot about the nitty-gritty success ingredients underneath it. And I think that's the same thing for long-term projects, is to unpack that a little bit more.
So I think a lot of the questions we're getting, probably not too surprising, are really about what we do to engage our community in really robust ways and open those spaces for internships. So the next question comes from Dr. Yaneth Correa. She says, what advice do you have for faculty when it comes to engaging immediate community members and companies and opening spaces for internships, service learning, course projects, et cetera? I think this is something that you and Tim and I started talking about last week.
Well, so look, one of the things I said is that employers really need to step up to, the plate here, right? The big news flash, anytime I talk to an employer group or a chamber of commerce event, is I say, hey, y'all aren't too happy with the work readiness of college graduates. Guess what? The number one thing you want are graduates with work experience. And, you're the ones that have that, right? So this is not me harping on higher ed. It's me certainly encouraging higher ed to do just what this faculty member is asking, which is to, think about how can I play a role in building these linkages. I was fortunate. I had a professor, Tony Brown, during my undergraduate days, who knew a lot of people in the business community, former alumni that he reached out to, who were willing to offer internships and even like day-long job shadow opportunities. I remember we got flown. I mean, I was an undergraduate. We got flown by a guy who was a Duke alum at the time and brought us to Boston, this student team, to do a project with them. Paid our way there. We were on site in his manufacturing plant for a full day. I mean, I bring this up because this was an individual professor outside of the university and outside of the program who built linkages with alumni who, he reached out to and encouraged to provide some of these opportunities. I mean, he was a force. And for the students that have gone through his capstone programs, I mean, all of them had valuable experiences there. So I would say, as much as, yes, at an institutional level, there should be encouragement and linkages for this, right? At a programmatic level, there's a lot of power in the hands of individual faculty to reach out to local employers, right? Especially, ones where there might be some sort of an alumni base attachment. And, at the end of the day, I think all of us have to pitch in on this. I mean, certainly the students too, right? For students to kind of understand how important an internship experience is, they will invest time and energy in these things as well. But I think there's a lot of power in the hands of individual faculty. I'm not suggesting it's easy, right? Because that's extra time of relationship building and outreach. But start with alumni, start with, former students that you've had relationships with. And even if they're not the CEOs of these organizations, they're in roles where they might be able to, at a minimum, do a day-long job shadow or a micro internship project, right? All of those would be steps in the right direction.
Thank you for that. So our 2022 Distinguished University Professor, Dr. George Dallum, has a question. He says, historically, higher ed focuses on a narrowly defined academic career in hiring. Should we be rethinking this approach based on all you've just said now?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, George, congratulations. It's quite an honor. I was glad to have been on and heard all of Tim's wonderful comments about you. And I'm a former distance runner myself, so not triathlete, but certainly appreciate your area of focus as well. I think, to your question, yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? Traditionally, higher education has tried to produce more academics, and that makes sense, right? When we think about people who are pursuing PhDs and advanced degrees, yes, there's the group that goes into various forms of industry in that route, and a lot who go into the academy. And one of the potential downsides of the traditional way that we've thought about that is that you could very well have a lot of faculty who have never worked a job outside of higher education ever. And it's not to say that they're not qualified, and I mean, obviously very intelligent, bright, capable people, but their career was as a student. They immediately were hired into academia, right? And so they have spent their entire career in academia. My point about that is that we should be valuing things like externship opportunities. And I think of this is the case at the K-12 level and the higher ed level is, we think about things like, being able to have a sabbatical and certain things like that. Well, what if there was the equivalent of a sabbatical as what I call an externship, right? Where faculty are able to take 3 months or a semester to go work inside of a business, right? Either in a real role or that they do it as an observation or a research-based project or whatever it might be. I think there's a lot of creative linkages where, again, we're talking about very bright, capable people. When they get a glimpse into a workplace or a particular work-based situation, they're going to quickly see the synergies of how they can bring that back to their classrooms, to their curriculum, to the students that they teach. And so, yes, it would be great if you were an institution that put emphasis on hiring professors of the practice, as well as folks who might be in the classic, kind of tenure track focused on, research productivity. There's certainly a lot of those things we encourage, but the biggest one that I think would have the most widespread impact would be a policy and incentive that encourages externships among faculty. I think that would do wonders across all the different colleges and programs.
We're actually having some discussions right this minute about externships and expertise that a number of our faculty have that they can potentially contribute to other work that's happening across the institution. So an externship that's sort of internal in that regard. We think that's awesome. Really exciting and something that our president spoke pretty often about when he first got here in 2017. Our next question is really in the same vein, but around advising and the faculty-student connection. So Dr. Carol Faust, who's an associate dean in our health sciences, asks, she says, starts with a statement, "I'm so thankful for the PAC Center and their work with our students for advising, but I find that it causes a disconnect for students with faculty as they're not required to seek faculty out for that advising. This was a good way for faculty and students to connect at least once a semester. I know the PAC Center does encourage students to reach out to their faculty members. Students often don't. What can we do to start encouraging or requiring that connection? What does that look like at other places, Brandon?"
Yeah, boy. I mean, look, it's a super important category. I mean, you could, and there's, again, different derivatives of the way we might think about that, right? Advising, mentoring, right? I mean, there are some nuances that you might argue are different between them. And of course, there's academic advising, there's career advising, there's financial aid advising, right? So there's I mean, you could put mental health counseling in that, broader advising, coaching, counseling bucket. And there's some similarities across all these things. There's also important differences. But here's what I would say about it, right? To build a culture of mentoring and advising and coaching is a really important goal, because a culture of coaching, advising, mentoring is one where all of us are involved in it, right? Where students understand how important it is, right? And because as noted in the statement in question, there's a lot of students who are offered these opportunities that don't take advantage of it. Either they didn't feel comfortable enough, they've had no experience with it. There's a book called The Privileged Poor that was written about 3 years ago, and it talked about the difference in experiences that students had in high school coming to college, where if you went to a private school, you were told how important it was to go to office hours or to go to academic advising, whatever, and that just became something you do. For a student who's never really been encouraged to do that, they're like, oh, well, if I go to advising, that's like showing a weakness, or like, they just had no familiarity with it. So a culture of advising and coaching and mentoring is a different ballgame, because that says, hey, I'm a staff member, I should be involved in this in some form, right? I'm a faculty member, I should be involved, even though it might not be my day job or what I'm tasked with as my actual job description. Really, really critical to think about how we do that. Now, I'll say a couple other things too, because if I look at on the side of institutions that are supporting higher ed with advising, one of the big breakthroughs has been what people call single point of contact advising. This is a little different ballgame, right? So instead of having academic advisors, financial aid advisors, right? Like all in different, in potentially different offices across campus, it's evolved to single point of contact where a student has one go-to person that knows a little bit about all of it and then has linkages to some of the experts in each of those categories. But the fundamental relationship still comes back from the time they matriculate to the time they graduate to one single point of contact as an advisor. Now, that might make some people's heads explode when you go like, well, how is that even possible, right? It's interesting because of all the institutions I was involved in doing alumni outcome studies for during my Gallup days, the institution that had the highest percentage of graduates who had a mentor that encouraged their goals and dreams was an adult-only online university. And I bring that up because if you think about mentoring, right, most people have the idea that it's about in-person, one-to-one, and that has to be, well, I mean, that is a big part of mentoring. But this particular university, talk about intentionality, right, and the model, they had a model where every student was matched with the same person from the second they matriculate to the second they graduate. And there were other people involved in the support of that student, but it was that relationship that was such a powerful driver of retention rates, of student satisfaction rates, right? And so I've said a couple of things here. One is creating that culture of advising and mentoring. It's everybody's role and responsibility. Students, need to embrace it as much as, staff and faculty need to be a part of it. But it's that intentionality, and then thinking about the models that can really scale it. This institution I'm referring to, tens of thousands of students enrolled. This is not a small enrollment institution. But when you understood their model and what they were investing in, you could see why they were off the charts on their graduates, saying they had mentors who encouraged their goals and dreams. They had an advisor who they built a relationship with over several years. And that made the advising I had at a fairly well-known institution pale in comparison. I mean, I was getting handed off left and right all the time. And I never built a relationship with academic advisors. I built relationships with faculty, but never with academic advisors. So
our next question is a little more specific. It comes from Dr. Doug Eskew, professor of English, and I think there's sort of a connected question I'll ask simultaneously. So Dr. Eskew says, it used to be well known that liberal arts majors like English prepared students for lots of things, grad school, jobs, citizenship. As you note, this wisdom has been lost in recent years. I think that our largely working class and underserved students suffer from it. What would you recommend our institution do, knowing our mission is a regional comprehensive, to increase enrollment in those humanities majors and provide our students a better life after college? The follow-up, which I think you would weave into this response, is, does the survey, the article that you wrote that you actually referenced at the beginning, the survey about the English degree being sought after fit with the enrollments in English departments? I think the implication is maybe it doesn't. We feel like maybe it doesn't here.
Yeah, look, I mean, I feel like his statement in question, we're totally aligned, right? In that, I would argue the pedagogy of the thing that we call liberal arts, right, is as relevant as it's ever been. And it may be more relevant for underserved students than those who have had great educational privilege through their careers. So therein lies, right, the kind of tragic outcome here of a brand that has become, a very, negative, brand in terms of how, people don't understand it. They think it means politically liberal. They think it means it doesn't lead to a good job because the word art is in it, right? The things that I kind of discussed before. We have to find ways, though, to use different words to describe it. That's part of it. And then we also need to think about, and this might be a reframing for all the faculty who are in, arts and humanities departments, right? Is that there's no reason why we can't. So we're kind of on the defensive, right? Because of this, kind of branding and some of the critique around how the country's thinking about the liberal arts. But what would it look like to go on the offense or go on the offensive with this? And what do I mean by that? To this day, the best leadership course I have ever taken, whether it was in college or since, was a course that was taught through Shakespeare, and it was in one of my undergraduate courses in public policy, of all things. And if you had taken that course out of my undergraduate public policy major and made it a course for executives at Fortune 500 companies, right, you would have people beating your door down to take that course. And this isn't exactly answering the question, but it's an example, right, of there's a reframing of some of these things at either a course level, at a, say, hey, I teach English, but one of the things that we're going to review is, classic literature that, looks at leadership roles in history, right? And really gets into the nitty gritty of what those leadership challenges were and how I can draw a modern kind of tie to those things. Again, I'm just riffing here, but I honestly believe there's still tremendous value in the liberal arts. I think we have to use different ways of framing it. I think we need to show students how there's a direct tie to that. And this was interesting. I had, not a perfect example, but after one of my talks, this was a few years ago, I had a philosophy professor come running up to me afterwards. And he was like, hey, he's like, I just want to share this example with you. He said, I teach philosophy. And he said, I haven't retooled my curriculum or anything like that. He said, but I try and make sure I take at least 5 minutes in every class to draw a connection between what we're talking about and a real world example, right? How would this discussion on ethics apply in an HR role inside of a company, right? Like he gave me a few different examples, but his point was he was taking these micro moments in the classroom. He didn't retool his curriculum, but just to have those little moments where he showed students a connection or helped them draw out a connection to what they're learning. Look, for those of you, who are Latin pros, right? The educational root of education means to lead out of. And I always like reminding us of that. Like anybody in education is to lead out of, right? To lead out of a student his or her potential, right? To lead out of them some of the answers as opposed to always stuffing them into them. There's nothing better for that than the classic, liberal arts and humanities. And so, can we take it in pieces and bring it to vocational and technical training? Can we take it in pieces and take it to, classic exec ed and other training? I mean, I think those are interesting examples that not only, show people its value in pieces, but start to reorient everybody to the value of it in a degree-based format. Right now, we're just playing defense, right? And if we keep using the words liberal arts, I don't think they're going to get any better. in terms of how they resonate, right? Like we need to describe the liberal arts, not use the words and the, the kind of banner headline.
Ironically, Dr. Eskew happens to be our Shakespearean scholar. So,
yes, I didn't know that, but I mean,
yeah, I was like, I'm not feeding you this, I promise. So this next question actually comes from a business leader himself and a member of our faculty in the Son School of Business, Justin Holman. He asks if you could point in particular, so maybe this is just a couple of suggestions, innovative programs at similar colleges, universities that bridge that gap between school and work. It would be particularly helpful if that happens to be outside a metro area where we're, dealing with more accessible job opportunities.
Yeah, look, I mean, the elements of the programs that I've really loved have been a couple things. One, the internship or whatever, co-op, whatever form you're using is a part of the program, right? Is a requirement of the program. There is support from the university to help obtain that. Where there might still be examples of unpaid internships, they've created funds to help students that can't afford to work in unpaid internships with some stipends, right? So talk about things that alumni would love to contribute to. That is a big one. So the schools that I've seen raise funds to support it. I in general, I like the idea because it helps. I still hate the idea that there's unpaid internships. So again, I would love to see those banned in general. But they also give some academic credit for internship, right? So whether it's required for the program or whatever, so that it's just for the student, it's embedded in what they're doing as part of getting a degree. It's not optional. It's not a side dish. It's not a maybe. It's just kind of fundamental to how they're thinking about their college experience. So that would be my very brief summary of the programs that I've seen be most successful. And then look, I'll just throw in other little examples. I was at a campus where we did a research project, and about 50% of their students were in work-study jobs. So they had a high percentage of students in work-study on campus. But of those students, right, when they were asked whether or not they were, applying what they were learning in the classroom to their work-study job or vice versa, it was like 2% reported that they were. And it was just this huge eye-opener for the institution who was like, oh my gosh, we've got this massive work-study program. And we've literally, they realized, and they said this, their words, not mine, like we've done nothing to connect between our academic life here and the work-study program that we have at the campus. And it was just like, I mean, to them, this huge, insight that they then very immediately started to work more on. So I think the simple point here is that we've all got probably more immediate opportunities to draw these connections. And I even think about if I'm a faculty member and I know what kind of job a student is doing either now or I don't know, their summer job or whatever it is, like ask that and then say, okay, well, how does our global supply chain course apply to, just if you draw those little connections, right? Even the smallest synergies there are going to be a step in the right direction.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of general feedback around unpaid internships. We definitely know that challenge here, particularly for those clinical student teaching hours, the things that look like full-time jobs, often unpaid for our students in nursing, health sciences, social work, teacher ed, certainly. I'm going to skip a little bit out of order because I think this next question, though hidden in more text here, let me get to it, does address what you just responded to. Brandon, do you find it worrisome or lamentable that more people view the purpose of a university education to produce obedient workers with just enough industry-specific aptitudes to efficiently serve the corporate class and its endless pursuit of infinite profit? Ideally, shouldn't higher ed be focused on a liberal arts education rooted in the humanities, the arts, the sciences, ultimately for the goal of promoting engaged and critical citizenry committed to reshaping social, economic, political, environmental conditions? What's your thoughts on that? Just a small topic, but for what it's worth, they end with sincere gratitude for your advocacy for abolishing unpaid internships.
Yeah, look, one of the challenges higher ed has is that I think it tries to be everything to everybody, right? And that's especially true in a comprehensive university model. And And so when I go back to the points, I mentioned that there's a lot of reasons why we value higher ed. So it's not one singular reason, right? You ask people this question, they have a list, which includes a lot of the things that were mentioned in that question. But I'll just say, right, I've always taken, and I think higher ed should take, a much more enlightened view on what it means to have a good job, right? Because I think where we go wrong is if we assume that we're just talking about corporate America and somebody making more money. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, right, that I live in the Washington, D.C. area. There are 1 million people in the Washington, D.C. area who work for the federal government here, right? It's a huge percentage of our workforce, right? Folks down the street from me who are serving our intelligence communities, and I mean, are literal heroes, and no one knows it, right? These are folks who are not making tons of money, but they're in very important jobs. I think of everybody who's in the nonprofit sector. I think of everybody who goes into jobs in higher education. Higher education is one of our largest industries in the United States. So when I talk about jobs and being ready, work ready, I'm thinking about that from the broadest perspective, right? It is not simply maximizing my income and earnings. And I know from a lot of the research I led at Gallup that, how much money you make is not one of the key determinants of whether you're engaged in your work. In fact, on well-being, some of you are probably familiar with these findings, but overall well-being, the degree to which you rate and evaluate your life on different dimensions, it doesn't increase over about $75,000 a year in income, which is pretty stunning. So yes, it does matter between 30 and 70,000, right? So I'm not saying money doesn't matter, but well-being, statistically speaking, doesn't increase over $75,000 a year in income. So when I say good job, right, it is more of that, kind of multi-dimensional aspect of what does it mean to be engaged in work, right? And that has a lot of things, right? Are we doing work that leverages our strengths? Are we doing work where we're engaged by who our manager is and how he or she supports us? And so I'm thinking about it very, very broadly. So when I go back to now in the survey research, right, people saying good or better job, they also have a more nuanced definition of that, because most of us could rate our jobs, right? If I said, imagine your job on a scale 0 to 10, 10 being the best imaginable job for you, 0 being the worst, how would you rate your job today? It's a question I actually had in survey research. Here's the thing. Only 11% of Americans give their job a 10. That might be higher or lower than some of you anticipated, right? But what it tells me is there's a lot of room for improvement in getting more people to an 8 or a 9 or a 10 on that scale. And it has almost nothing to do with how much money they make. It's whether they are learning in their job, whether they feel they're contributing to new ideas or products, or there's a whole bunch of other things that when you kind of get into the layers of the research that matter most. So back to the point, right? I think I would encourage all of us to think a little bit more expansively in what it means to have a good job, because guess what? Faculty have jobs. You are in a job at a university. It's a special job called faculty, but that's one of the important jobs in America. Teachers, same thing. And so I don't know if I answered the question, but I think from my perspective and then from the research perspective, it's a much more nuanced and kind of what I'll call enlightened view of a good job. And it goes way beyond corporate America and how much money people make.
Thank you for that. This next question comes from Dr. Kevin Van Winkle. He is a professor in the Department of English and World Languages, runs our writing program, and is a technical rhetoric specialist. His question is probably not too shocking, given his background. What you've asked, what you said about mentorship and real world opportunities for students makes a lot of sense. And I don't doubt that it enhances a student's experience and increases their perceived value of higher ed. However, as anyone who's tried to mentor students, even a single student, or manage a problem-based long-term project can attest, it's very time-consuming. I'm wondering then if there's a ratio of students to professors and or professors to coursework loads that's proven to be usable for creating long-term projects, allowing that time needed for mentorship between professor and student. I think we're back to talking about some of the balance and meaningfulness that you just mentioned about your own job. In other words, is there any research that indicates a good balance between faculty workload and the number of students they serve and their capacity to do many of these things that you advocate for?
It might be beyond some of the recent stuff I've been paying attention to, but my first answer is I'm not aware of like a really strong set of research that suggests there's a optimal ratio, that project-based learning has to have this ratio of student faculty. I think it's a lot in the model, obviously, right? So thinking about, to the degree to which you use upper class students, or, what we think of as teaching assistants, or like, there's a lot of different ways that I think we can break down some of the components of scaling project-based learning. And so, I've certainly seen high scale examples of it, but like, I'm not aware of a, well-defined set of studies that have kind of shown, the optimal size. In fact, I mean, there is some research on optimal class size at kind of the K-12 level. And, that some of you may be familiar with it, but it's kind of interesting, because too small a class size is actually not optimal. Too large isn't optimal. And the sweet spots are anywhere between 25 and 35 students, as high as 40 per class. And so, but again, there's not a pile of really strong evidence around that. I think to your question, though, no doubt these things are, project-based learning is something that most teachers, even at the K-12 level, and most faculty are less familiar with than some of our classic, lecture style teaching. It takes a little time to become more familiar with it. Like, I spent some time with a lot of the new tech high schools that are all project-based driven. And it was interesting because I talked to some of the teachers there. They had hired one of the teachers as kind of the district train the trainer for other teachers on project-based learning. And I'd asked her the question. I was like, well, how did you learn this before you got the job leading the district? She was like, I didn't. I just started doing it in my classroom. I got good at it. Other teachers started asking me for help, and then they asked me to be this district role. In other words, she didn't have any training in or whatever. It just, and then I said, well, how long does it usually take to get other teachers, comfortable with it? And she said 1 full semester. And that really threw me, because I thought she was going to say something like 2 years, or I don't know, but it was 1 semester. Now, my point about it is that I think when we get a little bit more familiar with it, just like a lot of people were thrust into the online, learning world as part of the pandemic, it didn't all go very well, of course, but building that familiarity and comfort, it doesn't take as long as we think it does to get to a place where we've got improved pedagogy, whether it's online or whether it's project-based. But the honest answer is, like, not a lot of us had a lot of experience or formal training with that before, things like the pandemic, or before there was a broader kind of acceptance of project-based learning.
We have just a couple of questions left. This next one comes from Dr. Leanne Martinez. She's a professor in our Department of Biology. She asks, what can we do? What strategies are out there for us to help students understand the importance of group work or long-term projects, and to really help them market those skills?
Yeah, it's a huge one. So I touched on this a little bit, right? Students, not all students, but a good number of students will try to avoid the courses that require long-term projects. And it's not like, on the surface you might go, oh, it's because they don't want to do the work. That's less of the driver. It's more of the grade factor, right? They look at it as like, oh, I don't want to get a bad grade if it's a really challenging, course or whatever, because I need to maximize my GPA, or I'm not going to get that, that job, whatever it is. And so there certainly is research to suggest that students are staying away from courses like that. And yes, for some of it might be they don't want to put in the extra work or effort. Others, of course, this is a personal style preference. Like, if they know it's a group project, there's a lot of us that hate the idea of working on group projects, right? And just aren't comfortable with it for any number of reasons. So, I think the important message, though, is that these are some of the most important, valuable challenges to challenge yourself as part of coming to higher ed. We've kind of lost sight of that, I think, with a lot of students, and this is especially true in the in schools that have been like private schools and elite institutions. I believe that students are less likely to challenge themselves than more likely in those environments, and it's because we've created a very narrow path of how we define success, and that has largely been about my GPA, my scores on tests, et cetera. And again, those things matter, but they're not the only, part of the, formula for success. And I think the piece that we've really undervalued are all the things I've been talking about, right? The experiences, the work, et cetera. So, in terms of getting there, I just think, again, this is one of those efforts that it's a communication and marketing effort to say, this is something that's really important. These are the things that lead to greater success later. Yes, they're going to challenge you more. It was interesting because you go back to the mentor research too, and you start to ask people, what was it that made Tim a great mentor, right? Or whoever your mentor was when you're thinking about who that person was for you. And in part it was, they really challenged you. They made you work hard, right? So it wasn't, they just made things easy and happy and hunky-dory, right? Like they pushed you, they took you out of your comfort zone. The lead out of you piece that I mentioned about the Latin root of education, right? They led something out of you. And the process of that is not always easy and comfortable. So it's a big marketing communications challenge because we've got very consumer driven students in a lot of higher ed where it's about, hey, you know, I want to be catered to, as opposed to challenged and taken through an experience that leads out of. So it's not a simple battle. I think all of us, you know, should be employed in that effort, but certainly emphasizing this to students, to parents, and then, you know, providing more examples where they hear it from multiple directions, right? They hear it from an employer who's doing a talk on campus. They hear it from, you know, the staff and faculty at the institution as important attributes. They hear about it, quite frankly, in an orientation session, virtual or on campus, where say this is an important part of it. We know it's linked to, you know, success later in life. It's a big marketing PR communications challenge, I think, most fundamentally.
I think it's important to mention that our Center for Teaching and Learning, they have a professional learning session on Friday related to group work. So for any of our colleagues who are particularly interested in this question, I think we've got some sessions going this week actually to address that. So potentially some good strategies coming out of that and some great collaboration among our faculty colleagues. Professor Ian Brennan, he is in our Hassan School of Business and leads a very robust study abroad program to England, actually asks a question related to study abroad and job prospects, and is just curious if you can address the impact that those kinds of experiences have for students and their career outlook, their job prospects.
Yeah, it's a super question. You know, interestingly enough, in the big national study that I was involved in, you know, a really small percentage of college students nationally study abroad, right? So large percentages in some of our traditional residential private institutions. I forget the exact stat, but it's something like between 1.5% and 2%, I think, of all U.S. higher education students actually end up having a study abroad experience. And of course, you know, that sounds like unbelievably low in the grand scheme of things to most institutions, but that's kind of the national number. So I mentioned that because there weren't a ton of insights based on the smaller sample size of those who studied abroad. That said, little doubt that there was some connectivity between having a foreign country immersion experience and the likelihood, for example, that you're more engaged in your work later. And I think a lot of that has to do with expanding your horizon, perspective, right? A lot of the attributes that we think of as study abroad. It's interesting though, because I tried to get under the hood of some of those insights, and there looks to be, I can't make any big statements about this, but there appears to be a bit of a difference between the study abroad experiences where it's truly immersive, like you live with a family from that country, you're, you know, speaking a foreign language as part of that experience, or you're doing, in some cases, there's a new wave of study abroad and work abroad experiences where you do work while you're studying abroad as well. And those who are kind of more of the tourism destination sites. So I go to a country that's English speaking, it's mainly pub crawl for 6 weeks while I'm there. So like anything, the quality of those experiences probably varies greatly, but I think, you know, little doubt that immersive experience aspect of it is a really, really important component. And certainly as I think about employers, right, more companies are engaging in global business. More companies are looking for people who are multilingual, have had different cultural experiences. And so, you know, you think about people who have had study abroad experiences, absolutely a major plus in terms of, you know, the hireability of that graduate.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from another of our business faculty members, Dr. Mike Wakefield, who is very involved in our economic development in our community and drives much of that work. You indicate, he says, that a good supervisor should focus on worker skills and help leverage to achieve the greatest success. Do you believe that every faculty member should be expected to make those strong connections with students, or should we ID and reward faculty who are just good at making these connections for students?
Well, look, so a couple things. This goes back to some fascinating projects I was involved with. First of all, it's a rare person who is both really productive at research and publishing, and who is also a super mentor. Now, they exist in the same individuals, right? But it's a small percentage who are really, really good and talented at both of those things. So I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive, but it's not an automatic that, I'm a productive classic tenure track faculty member and I'm a super mentor, right? If those are, different ends of a scale. So I think that's kind of an important point. In other words, like, I'm a big fan of the idea that higher ed institutions could have multiple, and it may or may not be tenure, but multiple tracks, right? Where there are different incentives for world-class classroom teaching, incentives for world-class mentoring, incentives for world-class research, grant productivity, right? In other words, we can kind of reward multiple dimensions, and have different tracks for faculty who have, different talents and kind of interest in those different kinds of categories. So certainly more broadly recognizing those contributions, I think, is an important piece. And so that would be, my first step, is to think of those as not necessarily mutually exclusive, but to have multiple tracks that recognize different contributions, mentoring being one of those. And so hopefully that's a helpful way to think about it.
So I think this last question, again, it's there's a lot of commentary here too, but this is really around concerns regarding faculty compensation. Faculty who are taking on more and more duties. A lot of the things that you've laid out here today suggest that there's more work that we can and should do to really serve our students. And I think at the heart here is that this has been an issue, all of these things, even pre-pandemic, seeing faculty wages stay stagnant, others increasing. So how do we balance as faculty being the best advocates for our students when we feel that we just don't have the resources to do so? I think there's probably some built-in questions here for our own campus leadership, but really most directly to you, what that balance might look like.
Yeah, look, this is happening across the teaching profession, right? K-12, you could consider early childhood centers in that category as well, in the very beginning of the scale. Certainly across higher education, there's a lot of folks who have been exhausted by the work, exhausted by the pandemic, right? There's the expression of, put on your own oxygen mask before you help others. And I do think that we really need to carefully visit that. In studies of workplace engagement, which is something that Gallup did a lot of, so I just became very, very familiar with the insights around it. One of the industries that has, relatively speaking, very low workplace engagement among staff and faculty are colleges and universities. And it's not because they aren't great places to work with super high mission and purpose. Like, you've got mission and purpose in spades compared to a lot of other, types of organizations out there. But I think there are also institutions that have paid less attention. Again, I'm using relative examples here, to things like, I'll call it employee engagement, staff and faculty engagement. And a lot of that is about learning and development, right? Am I still learning and developing and growing? You think about it, for people who are very intelligent, academically, engaged, that's a really big part of it. And one of the stunning insights from one of the workplace engagement studies we did in higher ed was that tenured faculty are actually the lowest on some of those learning and growth questions as compared to tenure track and those who aren't on tenure track at all. So it was really kind of a sad thing to realize that those who had gotten tenure, right, our stars of the academy, were the lowest on saying that they feel like, they're learning and growing. And the questions were phrased in different ways, but that was kind of the category. So, one of the areas is to focus on that. Yes, pay and compensation, there's other things. I mean, there are certain, thresholds of that matter a lot. But I think it's also kind of encouraging the time and the space for What do we value? Are our incentives aligned with those values? I think we've got value incentive misalignment in a lot of places across higher education, but just simply stepping back and saying, okay, I'm just gonna give you the most simple statement I can. If we want to increase student engagement, which is a big goal that most of us have, we need to increase staff and faculty engagement. It's just a really simple statement, right? You want to increase student engagement, we have to focus on increasing staff and faculty engagement. And that works in many, many ways beyond compensation. Compensation at a certain level, a certain threshold is really important. But I think it's a lot of those other attributes of what makes for a great workplace, what makes for me to be feeling like I'm learning and growing in what I'm doing. For some people, that's more responsibility. For others, it's just an opportunity to do more of what they're really good at, and then being recognized for that. So, and I might, that might be a little too vague of points, but hopefully they're helpful to a really good question. I think we need to put on our own oxygen mask before we help others. That's a good way to think about it, especially at the I hope tail end of a pandemic. Let's hope it's the tail end. Who knows?
Brandon, thank you so much for your time today. You've given us a lot of it and some incredible things to think about across the board. I'm sure there are many more questions that we didn't actually hear yet or get to. So I imagine you'll see some follow-up in the days and weeks to come. We've got some information in the chat about the Center for Teaching and Learning sessions this week. You'll see the link to the online program for the rest of Convocation week, including sessions this afternoon. Our next big one from our academic affairs team, and some really robust discussions that I think are well timed to happen after this. So this keynote today is funded through the Office of Operations and Advancement under the authority of the Hispanic Serving Institution Initiatives under the direction of Dr. Derek Lopez. We are incredibly grateful for that continued support for our opportunity for professional development and to begin learning as a campus. So thank you, Brandon, for your time. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mottet to wrap us up from this opening session. Thank you, everyone.
Donna, I want to thank Donna for facilitating the Q&A today. Donna, if you can capture the questions, I think it would be very helpful for us to look at those. But I want to thank you for.
We have them. There are a lot of questions I think that are specific for us. Absolutely, for sure. Thank you, Tim.
So I very quickly I want to recap where we've been today. First, I want to thank you for being here, getting ready to launch our spring semester. This is our 5th semester of living through and with COVID. As Brandon mentioned, I'm hoping we come to an end shortly. I know I've challenged you to make the decision to control that's within your control, letting go of that's outside of your control. We talked about the status and the health of our university by discussing 5 different themes. And then I concluded today's message by 2 areas of concern where we're going to have to pull together in the next 2 weeks to make sure that we get our students re-enrolled at the university, and we're going to be doing this in a short-staffed environment and asking for all of us to pull together and doing that in the best of our ability. I too want to thank our keynote speaker, Brandon Boostede, for sharing his thoughts and his words today with us. I want you to enjoy the rest of your convocation. It's good to have you back, and enjoy the rest of your day and your convocation week. Welcome. Thank you.